How was your Rotary Club meeting today?
Fine. It's cold. It's got no taste.
We're so used to images in the media of battered women and violent men towering over them, with the innocent child crying as he watches his mother getting physically abused. And it affects us on such an emotional level that for a lot of us it's quite hard to accept that a lot of the victims of domestic violence are men. We might say, oh yeah, it happens once or twice, but I want to show you this, not what's going on here, but in a second, this BBC talk show where the issue of male victims of domestic violence is discussed, because it's a great example of how the resistance to accepting this is spearheaded by feminism, basically. So one of the women in this talk show represents the sort of the typical feminist narrative of males being the perpetrators of domestic violence and women being the victim, and just to sort of try and understand why they have such an objection to this being challenged. Okay, let's have a look.
Domestic violence affects women from all walks of life, mothers, wives and daughters. On average, 1 woman in 4 will be a victim of domestic violence. So, chief police officers have suggested setting up a register of convicted male offenders and men merely accused by 2 women or more of violent behaviour to help women avoid these relationships. Our last big question: should there be a domestic violence register? Pat, you believe very much that there should. You think this is another weapon in the armoury. Lots of people are saying, but why should it just be men on the register? Why shouldn't violent women be on the register, for example?
Because the main perpetrators of domestic violence in our society are men, and the main victims are women. I have received this news with delight, because I've been campaigning and trying to inform women and children about how abusive men operate, how to spot them, how to avoid them, and how to get over the effects they've had on us and our children for 15 years. When I first started...
So in typical feminist fashion, Pat has not given any reason why women shouldn't also be on this register, if indeed the register is a good idea, which sounds like a shit idea. Just the assertion that men are the main perpetrators. Everything that she says about sort of like teaching people to avoid domestic violence could also...
You're Fathers for Justice, yeah.
Yes, I mean, it's the basis, the statistical basis for all of this, which I would really want to question. Domestic violence is completely misrepresented. 40% of the victims of domestic violence are men. This proposal for a register doesn't help that 40% of the victim group at all. It is only for female victims.
Well, it's 70% when it comes to incidents and convictions are women. You're talking about the unreported.
I'm talking about the figures from the most reliable source of all, which is the British Crime Survey published by the Home Office. And year after year, it consistently shows 40% of victims of domestic abuse are men, 60% are women.
Now, when he asserts that there's no justification for initiatives that only help women and not men, watch Pat as the camera pans to her and she rolls her eyes at this assertion, which is a typical approach for anybody with an ideology who just will not accept any evidence or any line of reasoning which goes against their foregone conclusion.
And where there's such a very large yes, it's a minority, but such a very large minority, there is no justification whatsoever for having initiatives that only address the needs of the 60% who happen to be women.
Pat,
it's blatant
you've got to come back on that. Then I'll come to the lady in red, just behind you.
This is quite common of feminism and all other ideological stances, that they necessarily have to reject any sort of evidence that goes against their ideology. So as you'll see here, when presented with evidence from the British Crime Survey from the Home Office, which ironically she later references herself, watch her as, rather than actually give any explanation as to why male victims should not be afforded the same sort of services as women, she just outright refuses to answer that and just disputes the figures.
I have to say that I don't agree with you, and there's no surprise to anybody watching. I don't agree with your figures. I don't agree with the statistics.
They're not my figures,
And
they're the Home Office figures.
I
They're
also
irrefutable.
want to go back to linking what you said, Christina, in that I run the Freedom Programme for Women. I've run it for thousands of women who've come on our Freedom Programme. Most of them have been too ashamed and too afraid to tell anyone that they are victims of domestic violence, because most of us, when we are victims of domestic violence, we blame ourselves.
Surely that's going to apply even more so to a male victim. A male victim is going to even be even more ashamed to actually admit that. So I think there's no good reason being given here as to why this register should not also cover male victims.
I'd like to just come back to the male victims.
Well, wait, let's hear from Pat. Then I promise the lady
let's look
behind.
at the body count. We've got a woman killed every 3 days. That's 112 women a year are murdered by partners and former partners. The last Home Office figures I got were 22 men a year.
That's
There's
not
a hell of a
22 too many.
big gap.
That is not a reason. Nobody's saying don't do it for what we're saying is, why exclude female perpetrators? Why?
As you just saw then, Pat just referenced figures from the Home Office, which is the exact same source that only minutes before she disregarded when the evidence didn't sort of come out with what she wanted. Now, coming up is a very interesting behaviour. If you watch her reaction when one of the other members of in the audience just comes out and says domestic violence is bad no matter who does it, no matter what the sex do. Now everyone claps. Pat just sits there, looks around, realises that the audience is all on board with this, and then joins in with the applaud, because I think that is very telling.
I think domestic violence is unacceptable, whatever the sex of the perpetrator and the victim. But also, I would...
And this next little snippet highlights the feminist attitude of men are just, you're guilty. And it's that assumption that then when they're presented with stories and anecdotes, it's just there in the background, and it's this assumption of like, well, you must have done something wrong. So bear in mind, all we know about this man who's about to speak, it's just what he says. We don't know him, we don't know his story or how honest he is, but going on just what he's saying, that's all we have to go on. Again, watch her response, because it's very typical of the feminist attitude towards men who claim that they have been treated unfairly.
What happened to you a few years ago with an ex-wife?
Can I ask this lady?
Let me ask you this, because you told me earlier
can
on.
I ask the lady and I'll tell you.
Right.
Would you put me on the register for poking my partner on the arm?
Well,
Explain what you mean.
Yes or no?
Explain what you mean.
20 years ago, I poked my partner on the arm. It went to court, and I was found guilty by a magistrate, not a jury, of assault. I'll tell you the consequences of that. I had to have supervised access to my son. A little social worker sitting in the background with a clipboard, how I interact with my son for 6 weeks. Then, because of her taking advantage of the situation and exaggerating that I'm a wife beater, I didn't see my son for 13 years.
Was she bruised?
She was no injury whatsoever. It was common assault. So you're saying take it further than that, and I get more punishment, yeah?
She had no bruise at all?
No injury at all. There was maybe a slight red mark which was marked, but it was thrown out of court. A common assault. I poked her on the arm in an argument about access to my son. I didn't see my son for 13 years. I went and seen him on his 16th birthday, and it's been very, very difficult ever since. I deserve that?
I am delighted to answer you. It is very, very difficult to get a conviction for any kind of domestic violence in court. And so...
one incident, one complaint...
And all men who abuse women minimise it. And they all say things like it was only a poke. It was only a slap.
One complaint, one incident.
So I've listened to what you've said.
Do I deserve to be on it?
I know the court system, and I know the legal system, and my knowledge of the legal system is, can I say, you got convicted. You were convicted.
Did my son deserve 13 years not seeing his father for that reason?
Okay, let's hear. You've had your hand up for ages. Go on.
Imagine using that logic with any other minority group. It's quite appalling, really. I mean, imagine saying to any sort of ethnic minority, "Hey, look, you got convicted. You must be guilty." It's just complete disregard for any possibility that there's some sort of bias in the legal system.
Well, I think Pat mentioned earlier about the body count, and yes, it is higher for women deaths than for men deaths. But I think we've just had a wonderful example here of another form, and very important form, of domestic abuse, of denial of seeing one's children for 13 years. Now, that really isn't regarded by the courts as any matter for prosecution. Yet I think most of us who've experienced that kind of thing would say it's the worst possible thing that anybody could do to me. And one statistic that isn't looked at when you talk about the body count is that so many men are driven to suicide when they lose touch with their children, when they're denied reasonably a relationship with their children. The male suicides are triple female suicides. This is happening time and time again within Fathers for Justice.
Very quickly.
We find this all the time.
I just want to say that many women...
So this is the website for the Freedom programs, which are run by Pat Craven. And as you can see, it is included now up here in the top right. There is actually men's program. Funny though, when you click on it and have a look, it's like, oh look, here we go, here's a program for a 2-day program for men who wish to improve their behaviour. Fantastic. And a bit further down on yes, just basically men who want to be nicer people. That's lovely. Thanks, Pat. Yeah, I'll be signing up for that one. So why the reluctance to admit that men make up such a bulk of the victims of domestic violence? I think for most people it's just very unfamiliar, so they're not aware of it. We do naturally have more of a tendency to empathise with women. That's just the way things are. Women and children get our empathy. There's a bit of an empathy gap when it comes to men. But most people will come around when they've sort of seen enough evidence. But it's the Pats, it's the feminists of this world, and she's not just sort of one-off like crazy cookie who's kind of spoiling it for everyone else. She works with victims of domestic violence. She's right in the thick of it. She's a spokesperson. This is she's quite sort of representative, really, of the feminist attitude, which I don't think can be simply explained as just the fact that, you know, feminism doesn't like men, or that we don't care about men's issues. I actually think that there's something deeper going on here. I believe, and I'm not alone here, but I believe that it's because the feminism likes to attach itself to any kind of oppressed group. So feminists are always trying to make the link to ethnic minorities, the black struggle, indigenous groups, despite what these groups might say or want, as if, you know, we align in our sort of oppression. And a lot of feminist rhetoric has been around the idea that the patriarchy and sort of male oppression of women is the primary form of oppression which all other manifestations are sort of based on and modelled after. Now, for a feminist, in her defence, to accept that men are victims of domestic violence almost as much as women, and therefore women are the perpetrators, it really questions the foundation of feminism, because one of the foundations is patriarchy theory. Now, they have a natural extension of patriarchy theory. You would predict that, oh well, yes, given this theory and how you see this sort of the world and the gender relations, it's only natural that you would expect to see men dominating women in the domestic sphere. So, you know, for years that's just been the image that everyone's kind of gone with. Oh yeah, we go along with that, because feminists they've owned the dialogue. They've sort of like been the ones to put the narrative out there and control what it actually is. To accept that that's not the case actually calls into question the whole foundation of patriarchy theory. To realise that, hang on, in gay relationships, you know, lesbians and gay men, there's violence there as well, almost to the same numbers. So the theory really doesn't hold up, and it starts to question it in a similar way that you know, Christians don't really have a sort of like a problem with kind of a, you know, on one level of admitting that oh, hang on, okay, the earth is you know, billions of years old as opposed to thousands like we thought. It's not that that's such a disgusting idea, it's that once you admit that, it just calls into question the whole foundation of the worldview. And I believe that that's what's going on here with Pat and with all the other feminists who, you know, I'm almost defending them here. Like, they have to ignore this evidence. They have to, you know, she does the token little clap of like, oh yeah, we care about men too. You can see what's going on there. She has this, you know, she's passionate about it, I believe, but this deep belief that like men are the aggressors and women are the victims, and this is classic feminist rhetoric. It's the whole the feminist worldview where men are perpetrators and the agents, and women are victims. So it actually keeps women in this sort of mentality of victimhood. Now that's dangerous for domestic violence because, like, you know, I think it's important to be aware that anybody, you know, could be violent. You can't just sort of judge them on race or gender or anything like that. But what it also does by hijacking the sort of the campaign against domestic violence and calling it a sort of a feminist issue is it's misdirecting people from the real root causes of this problem. I'm not an expert, but from my understanding, it seems to be a generational issue, so that children who grow up in observing or experiencing domestic violence then go on to they learn it. You internalize that sort of stuff, and then they kind of like repeat the behavior. So it's a generational issue rather than a gender issue. But feminism cannot accept that because it's an attack on the very foundational beliefs of feminism. All that anybody is saying, all these men are saying, is that why would you not extend that same sort of empathy and that same helping hand out to male victims as well? So that I would like to see a culture and a society where when we think of domestic violence, we don't just think of this, but we also think of this. And unfortunately, I don't think that that's going to happen whilst feminism has such a strong hold on the dialogue and the narrative around domestic violence. So sorry, feminism, you gotta go. So anyway, that's all I have to say on that. Catch you later.